Thomas Diringer is Diringer or Diringer?
Diringer.
Diringer. Okay. All right. Is with us. Superintendent of Buckeye Schools, and you were kind of off air talking to us, me, about you started with Buckeye in '92. So tell us about your educational background.
Well, I started out as a teacher and coach and did that for a number of years, and came to Lake County actually as an administrator in the mid '80s. I came to Edgewood in '92. I was a principal there till '98. Left for another job in Cuyahoga County and came back for a year in curriculum instruction in Buckeye, and then left for several years of superintendencies. Retired, came back to the area and had some discussion with the folks in Buckeye, and agreed to a year of superintendent help there, and that turned into year 2, which is what this is.
So where did you start out your educational career?
Well, actually, I many years ago started as a teacher and a coach in Zanesville, and I was just there a short time, and I headed up north to near where I'm from originally, Norwalk, Ohio, and worked there as a coach for a while, moved to several places. Historically, I've been to quite a few school districts and actually worked in Buckeye now 3 times, so it's been kind of an interesting trip.
So it's kind of interesting that you've been to all these places, and when you decided to retire, you came back here. Why was that?
Well, I've always had kind of a soft spot for Ashtabula County and certainly for Buckeye. A lot of good people here. I view Ashtabula County as a well-kept secret. I think there are many more good things here than the world at large sometimes knows. Because of where we're located, in your office and in your station demonstrates that, as we're so close to PA,
right?
That it does limit the perspective, I think, from much of Ohio. But it's a good place, and that's why I'm here.
It's part of what you're mentioning. That is part of the reason that they're giving that Conneaut is not part of a league, is because it's so close to Pennsylvania, and people. You got Edgewood's one place, but then you got to go another 10 miles to get to Conneaut. So
yeah, you bring up a good point. I'm very concerned about what we're doing in our area here with athletics for our youngsters. I think we're putting them in a very difficult position. The schools in this county work together very well, but when it comes to athletics, for whatever reason, competitive balance sometimes is an issue, but everyone is on their own or in different leagues and so on. It's not a good situation.
No.
I'd like to see us correct that if we can, but we need the support of folks in the community to do that. I would hope that will happen.
And when the team's playing and you look on the internet to find out where the heck is this place. And I did that with one, and I looked up the school district, and nowhere on it did it say where it was. Well, it turned out to be like Maslin or something. I found out later, but...
yeah, that puts the youngsters here in Conneaut, sometimes in Edgewood and other places, in a really difficult position, because you put youngsters on the road, you put parents on the road, staff. It's often during the week, particularly in the winter.
Yeah, the basketball games would...
Very difficult. And so I hope we can rectify that.
So one thing I wanted to ask you about was the North Kingsville sale. Do you know, first of all, I know that the evaluation of the building was less than the cost of tearing it down, so that kind of put everybody in a quandary.
The issue of old school buildings is very difficult for every district, and all you have to do is look at the common media and you read about it consistently.
The Amboy thing here in Conneaut.
Good example, Ashtabula City. Buckeye was Lincoln School a number of years ago, but almost every school district at some time or another has had a problem with an old building, and the problem is this. If you hold on to it, ultimately you need to demolish it, and it's very expensive, and that was the case in North Kingsville. The other option is to try to sell it, and often schools are not easily modified for other purposes, so there's a real cost to someone, and often it doesn't work out well, as we all know, and so it's a calculated risk on the part of the boards of education everywhere, and Buckeye is no different in terms of the North Kingsville building.
Okay, so how much was the building valued at?
I think the property had a value of $200,000. It's approximately 9 acres, and of course the building and so forth.
But it's nice if you could get that.
Right, but you can't. Of course, you can't get that.
Right.
And that's a big problem. So the board wrestled with it and has for several years. We finally made the decision in my time here that we'd get a specialty realtor to help us try to sell it. We're able to do that, but the real issue is, do you accept a small amount of money versus pay big money to demolish?
Right.
And
So
different people look at that differently.
How much did you end up selling it for?
I think the actual property was about $3,500. There were some other costs, survey, closing, etc.
Right.
So that figure's a little bit deceiving, but certainly not what the property was valued at. The problem is, to demolish, the estimate was approximately $200,000.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
So it's, you say the demolition, even though if you're not getting anything out of it.
Yeah, correct.
But do you know this group that bought it? Did they say what they wanted to do with it?
Yeah, they've had some discussion with us, of course, and the Board of Education. They wanted us to some degree a church affiliation, also some training for folks, computer training, things of that sort, a bit of a community center, if I understand it correctly. There are fields there, of course, playground area
Right.
and so on, and they like to see local folks, particularly youngsters, use that facility. That's a good thing.
Right.
It could be a very good thing for the community. I mean, that would certainly be our hope. But again, time will tell.
Right, and people say that there's nothing on their websites that really say, and there's a school board member who lives behind the school on Bugby that
Right.
she's concerned.
Yeah, and everyone is concerned because you just don't know the future. And we have faith in the folks that purchased, but again, the time will tell us what happens here.
My dad was an educator, and he spent his entire career in the Buckeye School District. And he started as a teacher at Lincoln, which then closed.
Right.
And then he went to Pierpont as a principal, and that closed. And then he ended his career at North Kingsville, and that closed. So.
It's a changing world, public education, certainly in our area. You know, as our numbers decline, and they're declining all over Northeast Ohio, and old buildings become, by necessity, expendable.
Right.
And the district's changed dramatically. When I was here originally in the 90s, we had, of course, 6 buildings.
Yeah.
And about 40% more students.
Wow.
And it's a significant issue for us. As we've lost about 40 students a year internally for at least the last decade, probably longer. And that's been offset a bit by our efforts at open enrollment. But there's a limit to that, and we're continuing to monitor that situation. And of course, that relates back to staffing and people.
Well, open enrollment also goes the other way.
Correct.
So you might have students that,
Correct.
you're right on the Conneaut line, so maybe some kids say, yeah, it's closer for me to go to Conneaut or Lakeside with the new complex there.
That's correct. We benefit significantly from open enrollment. We have far more come in than leave,
Okay.
but a lot of them are Asheville City students, partly because of where Ridgeview, one of our elementaries, and where Braden is located, literally at the edge of the city. So it's a very short trip for a lot of folks there to come our way, which has really helped us in the last several years.
Rather than going out to Saybrook.
Correct.
So how do you handle that sort of thing, that loss? Well, you've gone from, what was it, 4 or 5 elementary schools to
4.
2?
At least in my time, there were 4. Actually, Lincoln before that would have been 5.
Right.
Well,
Lincoln is being used for something, isn't it?
right now it's closed, and that was another example of
Oh, really? I
an
thought
old,
somebody had purchased it.
someone purchased it, but nothing happened then in terms of development. That is exactly the concern that the community and the Board of Education have, is that you run that risk every time. Even though it's no longer Buckeye property, it's viewed as an old school, which of course it is, and it's not good for the community.
Right. Wasn't that not when you were here, but I think it was a daycare or a nursery school or something for a while?
That's correct. For a short period of time, I believe it had some activities in there, daycare type thing. But I believe the longer term plan was to make it into some kind of a housing situation, which schools are sometimes very difficult to modify.
Yeah, I think about like in Williamsville going down Route 7, that school's been gone for a long time.
Yeah, it's a problem for everyone, as I said, and you know, we can all just hope for the best, make the best decisions we can, and hope that it works out well for the schools and the community.
So, well, I said at the break that I wanted to talk a little bit about charter schools. So can you talk about being an educator in Ohio all this time? You know a little bit more about what has happened with charter schools. Can you kind of give us a background on it and then how it's impacted things?
Well, there's a long history in Ohio, quite frankly, of supporting private education in some form. That started in the 60s really with transportation and has just expanded over many decades. In recent years, the issue of choice has become so significant, and it's really you know, a political issue. It's significant in Columbus, it's significant in Washington, really everywhere in the country. And Ohio, quite frankly, has been a leader in using public money for private education. And that's where the charter piece comes in to some degree. There's many versions of it. One of the ones that we deal with a lot is the online kind of programming. And basically a significant amount of dollars follow youngsters into private education in one form or another. And it's expanded, and again, it's a political position that many people choose to follow, believing that it's very important. We had talked a little bit earlier about open enrollment and how that's really helped our district. Well, as in our case it's helped us, other districts are hurt by it. If they, for whatever reason, significantly lose numbers, the money follows those youngsters to another district. And that's about choice as well.
And the money follows them to private charter schools.
Correct. So that choice issue, which includes charters, online schools, open enrollment, a number of ways to look at it. But all those things are versions of the right of choice for parents. And not everyone supports that. The majority does. And because of that, you know, it puts a lot of pressure on public schools. Less dollars come to us as youngsters go elsewhere by choice.
And there's also, though, public schools are held to a certain standard, and you've got all of the testing and all. And from what I understand, the charter schools are not.
Right. The accountability issue is different for charters, and again, that's something of a political football, if you will. Question asked, why is that? Why is their expectation different? Why is their evaluation or assessment different? And that debate rages politically. Meanwhile, we continue to move forward. The dollars follow youngsters. Assessment may not. Those kinds of things. So that debate will rage on, I'm sure. I personally, I don't see that lessening. I think choice will continue. I think it will expand where it's possible. And while, I mean, again, many people support that, I see it as really long-term negatively impacting public schools. We already suffer from loss of students just in nature here, but in Northeast Ohio. But beyond that, more and more students leaving the public arena.
So I guess I'm having a hard time, though, if parents are concerned about their students and they send them off to a charter school where there is less quality education, where more kids leave, I don't know, they don't graduate from. Aren't the graduation statistics at these charter schools aren't that great? The academic levels, what they can do. This isn't like, you know, you're going to a Montessori school or something where kids are being taken out of school and to go to something that's got a higher level, something they can't get on a public school level.
I think, but to your point, I think a part of it is that parents move children to other settings for a variety of reasons. And I think the overall environment of some schools bothers parents. And they worry about how their child may be treated by other students or what their options may be, that type of thing. And so I don't think it's just an academic issue that drives parents to choose other options. You know, in Ashtabula County, there's a fairly significant number of homeschool youngsters as well. And again, I think it's parents that have a variety of educational personal beliefs that they think are very important and met in other ways. And I think that will always be true. And as I said, I think in general terms that's going to continue to expand. But in so doing, the fabric of public ed, I think, is going to be hurt.
These charter schools, are some of these just online only?
Correct. Some are just online systems.
You see commercials for them.
One of the things that we're trying to do in Ashtabula County, and actually working with Trumbull County, we're trying to generate our own media a bit about the values of a public education and the good things that happen in public education, and of course there are a lot, as you well know.
Sure.
But yes, the advertising is somewhat frustrating at times to see that.
That would concern me too, is that kids stare at a computer. If you let them, they'll stare at a computer all day, and so they have no interaction with other students. If your parents aren't happy with the school district, they're not going out for sports, they're not in clubs and organizations.
To some degree, the law is such that youngsters can request and be included in extra activities, even if they're in some other kind of school setting. So
does that happen?
That does happen occasionally. I wouldn't say a great deal, but in conversations with my colleagues in various places, you will hear of it occasionally. So they do have that alternative, but I've always felt that part of public education was societal and helping youngsters understand how society functions, how you work with others, how if you're in a disagreement, how you work through that, or if you find classmates and teachers and others who are supportive of you, how you work with them and support their causes. That's part of public education too, and pieces of that I think are lost in other settings.
We said something about one of the reasons they may go to charter schools is because of how kids get along with other kids and that sort of thing. So I would assume something like bullying would be considered part of something like that?
Yeah, I think, yes.
So what do you guys, how do you handle that sort of thing?
Well, we have, we report out regularly. We converse a lot internally, administratively, about how students treat others, how we handle it as a disciplinary issue, as an educational issue. Bullying, mistreatment of students by other students, as you well know, is something that's happened really for a very long time.
Yeah.
And how we deal with it, I think there's efforts in our district, but others too, to try to improve how we deal with that issue by educating youngsters, by explaining the problem, and so on. It's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge, but I do think some parents respond to that concern.
Right.
We like to think it doesn't happen in our schools, but of course we deal with it. I mean, those things do happen.
Yeah, their issue with bullying is that it used to be, okay, most of it happened at school, and the kids go home and it has relief from it, at least. And I don't know, the school system can do whatever it can, but if they're being bullied on social media, on Facebook, on Snapchat, on everything else.
You make a very good point. It's gone well beyond the school setting. It's a lot about social media, and we're limited to some degree in what we can do there. Although you communicate with parents and youngsters about the problems of that kind of thing, but it's difficult. It's a difficult problem.
So you've been an educator, since the 80s then?
Actually the 70s.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
So tell me how things are different. What are the concerns today versus back in the 70s?
It's a very good question.
I'll just sit back for the rest of the interview.
I think well, there are several key things. Certainly technology is a huge shift.
Right.
In terms of communication pieces that we've been talking about, but also how instruction is delivered and so on. Good instruction uses technology. Technology in and of itself is just a tool. So some folks are great with that, others not so great. But the use of technology has been a big issue, and related to that, of course, assessment. And now we compare everybody in the school district and between districts. So assessment is grown into a huge entity, as we know with Park and other things. It's a huge issue for our schools in the state and really the nation.
Is it too much of an issue?
Yes, I think both technology and assessment, if they're not taken in context, it's still not specifically learning and helping youngsters grow and gain insight as well as knowledge. They're just part of that process. I think the other thing that we've talked about here is also a major change, and of course that's this issue of choice and movement of students from place to place. Part of it is on the system and the systems we're involved with. Part of it is a different society, differences in family structure, movement of families, and so on. That's an issue too. So in the course of almost 4 decades, those things have changed quite a bit.
I bet. When they were talking at Lakeside about the neighbor, there was the big thing, and it's still, I'm sure Randall's people in Ashtabula, is neighborhood schools versus school-centered. And one of the arguments that was made at the time about having the schools in Ashtabula the way they are, all of the elementary schools together, and I'm pretty sure I'm right on this statistically why, but they said that the people in Ashtabula, parents of school children, the kids move 65% of them. 65% of them move during the school year. And what that would do with the neighborhood schools is all of a sudden they would have a new teacher, they would have new students, and then a few months later they may move again and have another. And at least this way they have some stability. They can still go to the same school.
No, it's correct. I think there's some logic in that, and again, it relates to economics a bit. But again, that's a societal shift where people move and change locations. I think that's a legitimate point.
We're also talking about Buckeye schools, and they have changed from this strong industrial point and all the classified ads for houses said in Buckeye schools. That's what you wanted, and
it's shifted a great deal. We no longer have the resources that we had or the district had in decades gone by.
They're one of the few schools that have a big auditorium.
Well, actually, we have 2. What's interesting historically, Braden, of course, built in the late 20s, and in the 50s added a significant auditorium. It's still one of the best ones around. And then in the 60s, when Edgewood was built, and the district's realigned and changed somewhat, another terrific auditorium was built. So it's really nice to see.
You want to move one of them to Connie? Because they don't have any here.
I've worked in settings where they clearly did not. So Buckeye's very, very fortunate, and there was some real foresight there.
Yes.
One of the things I'll say about Edgewood, the high school, I always felt as a principal it was a great building, a great layout, had some nice features to it, and actually it still does. The problem with our buildings is, and this is where our PI renewal comes in a bit, they're just old.
Right.
We've got two of the 4 buildings are approaching 90 years old, and they've been well maintained for decades, but the infrastructure starts to break down, and we just need the dollars to keep those going.
I remember noting that when Jefferson got money to build new schools, and I believe, or give or take a year, that the original Jefferson High School, which is no more, was built the same year as Edgewood.
Probably about right.
Like 61, something like that.
In the late 50s and early 60s in much of Ohio, there was a real consolidation effort that happened out here as well. And so there are a lot of areas where new schools were built or major remodel efforts, to accommodate different numbers. One of the interesting things I think has happened in Ohio is rather than improve funding to public schools, the answer from Columbus was let's build everyone small new schools. Well, what we've learned over the last 15 years or so of seeing that is we have some great small schools around. Unfortunately, they're tough to operate. They're expensive to operate. The local folks have to come up with more dollars to manage them and so on. So it's been good in some respects for some youngsters, certainly in Ashtabula County, although not Buckeye, but it hasn't solved all the problems.
Right. Well, I don't know, just from personal, I went to, when I was a kid, Lakeview in Conneaut, which is demolished, and I went to Rao, which I always thought was a prison, and that was a 3-story building, that was demolished. But I would go to programs. My grandson Henry goes to Kingsville, and it's kind of neat to see a school that is very functional. And I mean, it's older, but it reminds me of the school I went to. But it's a little larger, and it still works. And
what goes on in schools is often more important than the structure. But for example, I think one of the things we deal with is the issue of air conditioning, which of course we lack. Well, many of the schools in our area want to start changing calendars and get youngsters back in school a little bit earlier, finish earlier, split the semesters at Christmas break and such. We can't do that well because our buildings are too hot in August. So that's a bit of a problem.
I've been at Edgewood when there were big fans out in the classrooms.
That's correct. So we struggle with that a bit. And so even though our buildings are pretty well maintained, we do have some infrastructure issues, and certainly we can't air condition. The other thing, when we were growing up, much of the world was not air conditioned.
Right.
So we were
You
more
didn't think
accustomed.
about
You
it.
didn't think about it. So now, when many more youngsters grow up in settings where there is air conditioning and where all business have it and many cars and so forth, going into a school that's not is a little bit tough. It's interesting challenge.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of Kingsville, also they have a nice playground. I found that I was a little bit, I wasn't upset because I realized it, but when they took down the playground behind North Kingsville and they moved it to Geneva, I mean, I could see why that happened. But we took the grandkids to ride around the, when school was not in session on the weekend or whatever, ride around the playground there and then go play on the swings and stuff there. And they have just overall a nice facility there.
It's and again well maintained for decades. No
Right.
question about it.
It's where my wife had her student teaching back, I think it was the 1930s or something like that.
Goes way back. Absolutely.
So maybe we should take a break now, but I wanted to ask you then about what makes Buckeye schools different that they did not get offered all of this money. So we'll talk about that. And one thing that Conneaut Schools has been more than a decade was the first system to get new schools, and it was followed by Jefferson and Ashtabula and Grand Valley and Pymatuming Valley. But what is it about Edgewood that it was not able to cash in on all of the big money for the schools?
Well, I wasn't around, of course, during many of those kinds of discussions, but understanding the system a bit while I was in other settings, quite a number of years ago now, the state's answer to court criticism, if you will, of funding was to improve opportunities for districts in terms of building facilities or remodeling facilities. And there were a great many rules and stipulations involved in that process, and the state was in a position to control it significantly. So what they would say to districts is, based on a sliding scale, that is the district's ability to pay, the state would say, we will get you X amount of dollars. You must build as we say you build. There are a few options, but basically it's on us to agree that we're going to do certain things a certain way. We'll give you a percentage, and often in the early days it would be as high as 80%.
Yeah.
And so in Ashtabula County, as my understanding, of course, many of these districts in the county were able to get that very high rate of state support. Buckeye was different in that, and remains so, because of its industrial
You guys
base.
are so rich over
Well,
there.
the perception is there's an industrial base, and while it's shrunk significantly, it still to some degree exists there. So when you look at the numbers now in terms of Columbus's viewpoint, we're still far down the list to get significant state support, and that support has dropped over the years. And so I believe when Buckeye looked at it a few years ago, they were looking at about a 20% share of state money, which means
Exact opposite.
the opposite, which means that the local folks would not only have to pick up a tab for about 80%, but also follow state guidelines. So it just wasn't a reasonable thing to do in the eyes of many, and I certainly understand that. But now we're dealing with that problem. I know a number of years ago the district was looking at doing its own building project. The problem is a lot of our folks simply aren't in a position to help finance something like that. We're well over 50% free and reduced lunch. which means a lot of our families are not well to do.
Right.
And so we're dealing with those issues. Families are dealing with a lot of issues. So we're just not in a position to do it. It's kind of a catch-22. If you want to follow the state's lead, you can do it, but now you have to pay a significant part of the cost.
Right. And the schools are, for their age, in pretty good shape. You do have a very nice auditorium at Edgewood and at Braden, and so.
Sometimes our buildings are a little deceiving, though. They look terrific. They were really well developed many decades
The
ago.
outside of Edgewood, to me, doesn't seem to look much different than it did in the 1960s,
Which
from
is
what
true.
my memory can.
Which is true, they've been well maintained and done well in the early days. But the infrastructure, there are some issues with our infrastructure, and we need local support to maintain those buildings. That's where the issue is. We're on the ballot here for a renewal of a permanent improvement levy.
So when did that first pass?
That passed in '71.
Wow.
It's been around for all those years. It's been modified a couple of times. It was replaced, I believe, twice. But it's significant to us. It generates
Is
over
this a
40,000.
replacement or is this?
No, this is just a renewal.
Okay.
So it doesn't change anybody's rate there. The value, and this is another interesting point, the value of it has gone down because the value of property has gone down.
Oh.
There was a time not many years ago, a decade or so, when it was worth well over $500,000. Now it's approaching just over 400,000. So the value of it at the millage it's at 1.9 has dropped. So eventually the Board of Education and the district are going to have to make some more decisions about their buildings, but not right now. Right now we're just going to renew.
So what kind of needs are there in the district that the money is needed for?
Well, we've had
needs for the needed.
Needs for the need. Our infrastructure has some issues. Heating is a problem. Roofing is an ongoing problem.
Oh, I bet.
Parking lots are an ongoing problem. Those things are forever because of weather and so on. Weather, as we know, is
problem
tough.
with your house.
That's right. It's exactly. And people don't realize in your home you have to repair. So, and so we have some infrastructure things that way. For example, last year when I first came back on the scene, we had some fascia issues in a couple of our buildings where literally the fronts were coming away from the support structure behind the fronts of the buildings. So that's a pretty expensive proposition to fix that. So when buildings get to be as old as ours are, you really do have those issues.
Although I think of all of the new buildings that were built, that there were issues afterward. My wife taught at the Conneaut Middle School, and there was like condensation on the windows, and when they fixed it, somebody left a fingerprint inside the glass plate. So I mean that's there forever. That's right.
No, it's true. A lot of the new construction in school buildings in Ohio have had issues, window issues, roofing issues, things of that sort have been a concern. New construction isn't necessarily always good construction.
Right. I think we got a phone call coming. Let's see what. Hello, you're on the air.
Hey, back to the sale of the North Kingsville School. There is a lot of grumbling going on, a whole lot, and I get to hear it. But how much was Pierpont? Do you remember how much Pierpont was sold for?
I was not around those times. I don't.
Well, actually, Pierpont had become part of the Pymatuming Valley School District at that. Before that, it was part of Edgewood, and then Pierpont went to Pymatuming.
Buckeye, did we own the school? We still own the school, didn't we?
No, it became part of. It was an empty school building that was owned by
Pymatuming. We gave it to
Pymatuming.
Pymatuming?
Yeah.
Well, the funeral place had to buy it, didn't they?
They had to buy it.
Who did they buy it from?
They bought it from Pymatuming, yes.
The property was transferred to another school district.
Yeah, once the voters went to Pymatuming Valley, that became part of their school system.
Yeah, but I thought as soon as they transferred the kids to Pymatuming, that school, you sure we didn't sell the school? I thought we sold the school.
I
No.
don't think so.
Yeah, all right. Yeah.
I'm sure that it went to fine tuning.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. Hey, but yeah, everybody thinks that $3,200 is a big slap in the face to the taxpayers.
Well,
I mean, yeah, we could have got a whole lot more out of it. I mean, come
well,
on.
how many years though did they try?
The efforts to sell it have been around for 3 or 4 years. There simply is no one expressing an interest to pay anywhere near the actual value. The choice basically, as I said before, was spend a couple $100,000 to demo it or save that money, basically.
Yeah, I don't know. Hey, but I did see something the other day that I was wondering about. I seen like a half a school bus. You know, like it was brand new, but it was only a small school bus. It was from Buckeye. How many of them do you got in the fleet now?
I couldn't give you an exact number. It's very small, but those are usually used for special needs students. So in other words, the number of students you're transporting is specifically small.
Well, I don't know. This bus, it was turning around at our Carroll's there on 193, and it seemed like there was quite a few special needs kids in there then.
That's
Yeah,
probably
but
true. That's probably true.
That's why they got the bus.
Usually I see the bigger bus, and when they're traveling around, they ain't got nothing. You know, when they leave the schools, especially heading out this, down south, they don't have nobody in them.
Yeah. One of the biggest problems with busing is exactly that, is the rate of being used, that the numbers are relatively small. And that's, in a district like Buckeye that's fairly spread out, there is a big cost in transportation.
Yeah, but then when you go up to Kingsville, and there's a line of cars, people are not using the bus, letting their kids use the buses because I mean there's a line of cars coming from North Kingsville, and down and from the south and that.
That's correct. As you reorganize, as the district was reorganized a number of years ago, youngsters are coming from farther away to get to school, and so yeah, I think you're exactly right. That more and more parents feel the need to, for timing reasons or whatever, to transport
They don't want
their
the
children
kid on the bus for
that
too long.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true. Some truth in that.
And I don't know what's happening with Sheffield out here, but they were grading the roads. Last few years, the dirt roads, they were grading them real good. This year, I don't know. They haven't graded our Hines in a long time. Since the middle of summer sometime.
I think that's out of the hands of the Buckeye School District, though.
Huh?
Although, I bet you that's out of the hands of the Buckeye.
But the buses are still
Right.
traveling on these roads,
True.
and they're not missing, too many of these potholes. I mean, they're not dodging them.
I can remember
when they go all the way across the roads, and they're just making the roads even worse. These big buses.
Yeah.
And but the township, I don't know why they're not keeping up with the roads. I mean, they're getting the money, and the roads, they still have the same graders and everything, but.
Yeah.
But I don't know why, with these bigger with the bigger buses, I mean, they just tear up these roads out here, But what's the speed limit on these roads? What, 40 mile an hour? I think they are 35, 40 or something, yeah, for a dirt road, and yeah, they don't. But I like the idea of the smaller buses, because I do notice, that there's not too many. It seems like they save money on fuel and that too,
Right.
with the smaller buses.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank
Later.
you. Okay, so we've got through. How much is this renewal?
It's 1.9 mils. We're going to generate about $410,000.
And it's not going to cost people anymore because
No.
they've been paying for it, give or take, since 1971.
Correct.
So you'd be 40 years old and.
Still paying for that particular levy, yes.
Yeah, a couple of things I wanted to bring up, and I've lost track of the commercials. But one thing I wanted to bring up was engaging students. We were talking about this a little bit off air. I did a video on at Edgewood about the CSI classes. Did teachers today have to do more innovative stuff or imaginative stuff? That was a cute video. Because the teacher, Miss Simpson, was teaching kids, they were doing blood splatterings, but then the blood splatterings, they were measuring them and doing math honing in on math skills with that. I just thought it was kind of neat. It was fun.
I think, I think teachers today are pressured to some degree because of social media and the media in general to be creative and try to do some different things with youngsters to keep their interest. I think it's a little bit of a challenge today. We still deal with nuts and bolts of learning for youngsters. Obviously, we know that's true, but fairly quickly, youngsters get sophisticated in terms of what they experience, and so that puts some pressure on teachers and buildings to be somewhat creative. We were chatting off the air a little bit about the experience that youngsters have today is so different than it was years ago.
Absolutely.
Because of media and computers and technology in general. It's a big shift, and so that is a part of what teachers deal with today. No question.
How does Edgewood or Buckeye schools handle? Do all the students have some computer training, or?
We don't have one-to-one computing. Some districts have moved in that direction, but we certainly allow our students to use a lot of different kinds of equipment. Some of it may be their own. We spend a lot of time working with our infrastructure technologically to accommodate that. It's a constant challenge. We're in the process of looking at how we use the technology piece. If we need to advance that, maybe more quickly than we are. As you know, and certainly in your business here, it changes rapidly.
Oh, it does.
It gets more complex all the time in some respects. But the beauty of young people, I think, is their experiences are such that they're far more comfortable with it than staff typically. As I've noted over the years, the younger folks are, the more comfortable they are with various forms of technology. So when you deal even in the youngest children, as we were saying, 5, 6, 7 years old, many of them have a lot of experience already with technology at home and elsewhere, and actually that's a benefit to some degree. So it's up to us to figure out how best to implement technology, and yes, our youngsters have a lot of opportunities.
The other thing, and I had Michael Notar on a couple of weeks ago, the county superintendent, and it was right after there was a report coming out about kids and exercise, and that they do not get as much recess. And I've already mentioned this about 90 times on the air here, but there was one person that was doing it that came in, and it was story time at the end of the day at school, and the teacher was trying to read a story, and there were kids twirling around in their chairs. There was a girl hitting herself over the head with a water bottle, and they're not all ADH whatever, but they just don't have enough time, and with all of the testing and all, to go outside and run around like they need to.
No, I think you're right. I think interestingly, the standards for physical education have dropped. Meanwhile, we all understand that youngsters need more opportunities for exercise and need to get more exercise, and yet we don't do that well. So that's a challenge because of the assessment issues and time on task instructionally and so forth. You're right. It's a problem. It really is.
Now, part of it is the parents' responsibility to do this, but when the kid's in school for 8 hours.
There's no question that youngsters need more of that, and how we can incorporate that is a challenge. With assessment changing a little bit, at least hopefully moving forward even more, hopefully we can get more time for youngsters in that respect.
It may help them learn a little better as
Absolutely.
well.
I agree.
So you were hired a year ago because the superintendent was leaving, and so you are going to be retiring at the end of this year, right?
Yet again, yes.
Yet again.
I had agreed to a year, and we had some conversation last winter, and I think the board felt and I felt that we wanted a little more stability here for at least a year, and my hope would be that we can position the district in as many areas as possible for a longer term run of a superintendent.
They'll begin transition for whoever is your
that
successor?
would be our hope. It's a good place, as I've said, and there are many good people here, many good young people, and we want it to be as good for them educationally as it can be. So we're working with the board to try to work through some issues and get ready for that transition.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit too off the air about how this seems to be a regular thing where retired superintendents come back. Mr. Colucci was at Buckeye for a while, and then when Edgewood, or when Ashtabula needed, he ended up coming out of retirement for a couple of years.
Mr. Donato.
No, Dr. Don, yeah, I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah, Joe
Yeah,
worked many years in Buckeye in a number of chairs, including the superintendency,
Right.
for quite a number of years, and then finished his career
And
in
it just
Asheville.
seems that like that happens more.
I
And you said that it's not an easy job, and
think it's certainly a difficult job and gotten more difficult over the years. And a lot of younger folks seem to be shying away from school administration because it is complex and difficult. There are a lot of stressors involved, a tremendous time commitment. One of the things that's happened too in the last, I would say, 15 or 20 years, teacher pay has increased enough generally throughout Ohio that a lot of folks in the field who might consider administration simply look at the trade-off of more days and hours for somewhat more pay, but
it's not worth
not worth it. And so I think we've created that to some degree. And hopefully that might change at some point, but it's difficult.
And the superintendents aren't getting the summer off.
No, I've been asked many times over the years, what do you do all summer? You don't work, do you? Well, trust me when I tell you, sometimes the summers can be every bit as difficult as the rest of the year because maintenance of facilities, dealing with transportation preparation, staffing, movement of staff, assignment of staff, all those things are going on in the summer when
Absolutely.
not a lot of people are around. So summer can be, it's different, but it can be somewhat difficult. And clearly the time commitment is great.
You were talking about, that reminds me, Mr. Notar was on a couple of weeks ago, and one thing that they did over the summer was to try to find a way, you're talking about transportation, find a way that they could increase busing transportation to the 9th grade this year without any increase in cost.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of thing.
It's difficult to do. Yeah, there's some fixed costs, as we were with the gentleman that called in. Transportation is always a struggle because you need so many people. It's literally moving parts. Maintenance part of it is very expensive. Those kind of things. So you're always looking for ways to improve that. But our district now is about 70 square miles, and there's no denying that you need to transport people all that way. So it's a challenge. It really is.
Back when you started at Buckeye, it was even bigger because Pierpont. I mean, that must have made it a huge district.
The district, I think, was about 100 square miles at that time. But the Pierpont piece, of course, was very large and very significant. Made it quite a bit more difficult to transport youngsters. Absolutely.
It's kind of, we need to wrap up. It's kind of, think about education 70 or 80 or 90 years ago when every little burg had their own high school, and Pierpont had its own high school, and the Williamsville that's closed had its own high school, and just how more complicated and
Absolutely.
everything.
You're absolutely right. It's a much more complicated world, and to some degree that will continue.
Right.
As we look at reorganizing districts and the cost of operating districts and those kind of things. Public education in 10 to 15 years is going to look quite a bit different yet again. That would be my estimate.
Yeah, it looked quite a bit different than it was 15 years ago.
Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you very much for coming in.
Glad to do it. Thanks for having me.
All right, Thomas Diringer, he is for a few more months, is the Buckeye Superintendent, and we will be back.